Well, hello and welcome to this week's A Photographic Life, in which I put forward a load of questions and supply very few answers. But what's different about that? So I want to start this week with, I suppose, an ongoing conversation that I hear a lot. And it's all about the death of social media and whether or not we as photographers need it. I suppose also we as human beings need it. I hear a lot of unhappiness about Instagram, particularly with their new happy hearts, which pop up on photographs as likes. A while ago, I tried out Blue Sky because I wasn't particularly happy with Threads as a replacement for Twitter. I kind of refused to call it X. But anyway, and Blue Sky seemed very quiet. There wasn't really an awful lot going on. There didn't seem to be a lot of photographers there. And it kept on unlogging me, and that was quite annoying. Anyway, so I moved back to Threads, having been there, left, and gone back. And I must say that from a photographic perspective, it does deliver for me the main reasons I'm on social media, which is primarily to let people know what we're doing with the United Nations of Photography, the podcast, obviously, and articles which I write for the website, and the occasional thought that crosses my mind. However, I really use it as a library. I'm really more interested in what other people are saying and what's going on. Exhibitions, books, films, people recommending things. That, for me, is the power of that kind of social media, and also recognizing people who share similar views or perhaps not similar views, but whom I can engage with mutually respectful conversation. But what I've noticed about photography on Threads recently, in fact over the last couple of months, is it seems to be an absolute ball of confusion and misinformation. And it makes me wonder if this is a direct reflection of a world in turmoil. I think we can all agree that the world is in turmoil at the moment. But the problem for me with photography on Threads goes across a few different areas. First of all, there seems to be a lot of self-proclaimed experts on there, which is always difficult because, like any profession, like any area of creative practice, over time comes experience, and that experience should inform our opinions, our knowledge. Reading helps with that. Viewing films helps with that. Listening really helps with that. And a lot of people whom I'm seeing as these self-proclaimed experts don't really seem to have spent any time with the medium over any long period. There also seems to be a lot of confused language that doesn't have any real relevance to the medium. Words are being used that I really have no understanding about whatsoever. People seem to be trying to create trends or little things that are going on that we all supposed to be aware of, that FOMO thing. So that's a problem. In connection with the confused language are confused understandings. The people just don't seem to really understand how photography works. I don't mean picking up a camera and pressing a button. I mean the realities of photography. The idea of earning a living from photography, the profession of photography, the medium of photography, how galleries work, how exhibitions work, how selling prints works. There are rules to all of this, and whether we like them or not, they exist. They're the kind of things that we try and bring you here on the podcast, that Bill and I talk about, that Fiona and I talk about, and I talk about. I try and bring to you some kind of a best practice, an understanding born of experience and knowledge. And in that sense, I suppose, in a way, I'm a bridge. You know, I'm telling you what others think and how it works. I'm not just giving you my opinion here. You know, these are facts. Now, those facts sometimes upset people, and there's a real defensiveness. When challenged, people don't like it. They instantly attack. And it makes me wonder if this is a base insecurity within people that's showing itself. That lack of knowledge and experience of the medium, when challenged, instantly goes to their very core. I think all of this is a great shame, and I'd really like to think that in this world where everything is so confrontational at the minute, that there could be a little bit of love and a little bit of friendship and a little bit of understanding and a little bit of listening. Now, if you follow me on Threads, you might say, well, hang on, Grant, you're pretty abrupt to people. And yes, you're right. Occasionally, I am. But that's primarily because I'm dealing with facts. I'm not dealing with subjective opinion here. I'm dealing with reality. And I think as photographers, it's our responsibility to identify that reality and to work with it, and then to implement it in our practice. Because if we don't do so, we're just going to be living in a bubble that's just too easy to pop. Whilst we're talking about that idea of building a photographic practice that goes on for a number of years and has some kind of relevance to us and to other people, it occurred to me the other day how many photographers that used to be really important to me and whom I saw as touchstones within the photographic culture who've disappeared, who I don't hear mentioned anymore. And I was thinking, well, why is that? Why do we keep hearing the same names mentioned again and again and again? Why do the same photographers keep getting exhibited again and again and again? The photographers I was thinking about was one from Memphis, Hugo Foote. There was a French photographer, Gilles Tapie, an American, Dewey Nix, a Spanish photographer, Xavier von Hollenrath, and a French photographer, Michel Momy. Now, they all still have websites, and I think they're still creating really interesting work. They also produce books of their work. But they don't get spoken about in the general conversation. I suppose in a sense what this is about is who chooses the photographers who are important to us. Who chooses the photographers who we're going to be presented to? And is it the responsibility of the photographer to ensure that they remain in that public consciousness? Now, all the photographers I just mentioned, I'm going to put links to their work on the podcast page, so you can have a look and see what you think. Maybe I'm going to reintroduce them to people, and who knows, there might be somebody listening who thinks, yeah, I want to put on an exhibition of that work, or reach out to those photographers. They're all now getting older, and I wonder if that sort of rush for the new big thing is blinding us to work that was produced. And these photographers were primarily working in the 1990s, I would say, late 1980s, 1990s. That's when they were really sort of at the forefront of my vision. But in the rush for the new, and as I've spoken about with Fiona on the podcast when we're reviewing exhibitions, the deification of the dead photographer, we're missing out something here. We're forgetting the photographers who are still with us, who've got long bodies of work behind them, which really deserve to be seen. I'm sure that you can think of photographers that fit into this category also. Let me know. Let me know what you think. Let me know about the names that you remember that you think actually deserve to be recognised. I think it could be quite an interesting beginning to a conversation. I hope you're still with me on this episode. At the recent Photographic Life podcast live event, one of the listeners and one of the people who attended came up to me and said, I really love your podcast. You've got a voice that's quite soporific. I find it easy to go to sleep listening to you. He saw that as a positive, and I'm going to take it as a positive also. I hope that you are still with me. Anyway, I want to talk about something now, which I suppose is becoming a dominant in our cultural lives, which you may not think has anything to do with photography, but I think has everything to do with photography. It's basically big screens at concerts. If you've been to see the recent Oasis concert, you will know that they don't do very much. They just stand still, play their guitars, or Liam just sort of glowers at the audience, banging a tambourine, and everything is happening behind them on a big screen. I've seen similar at other concerts, big concerts, of course. My big hero, Bob Dylan, refuses to have such a thing, and in fact almost refuses to have any lights on the stage, so you can hardly see him. But that's another discussion for another time. I'm no big fan of Radiohead, but I saw recently that they seem to be performing completely behind a big screen. So the screen is at the front of the stage, and it's showing what's happening behind the screen on the screen. I suppose U2 really, another band I'm not a huge fan of, I have to admit. I suppose they started it all with their Zoo, what was it called? Zoo Europa or something like that. I can't remember what it was called now, and Achtung Baby and all of those things. When they started to bring that idea of using screens on stage, that continued with that for them with their residence at the Las Vegas Theatre, followed by the Grateful Dead, the Eagles, and Backstreet Boys. All of these bands making the performance a visual performance, obviously making the most of huge screens now, that technological ability to create such things, because now they're so light where they used to be so heavy. So as I said at the beginning, what has this got to do with photography? Well, I think it has everything to do with photography, because what it really is visual communication. And all of our phones and all of our cameras now have the ability to create moving image. I've spoke about this many, many years ago. And back in 2010, was involved in something called convergence, the idea of film converging with the still image. And I've always been a big proponent of the moving image for photographers alongside the photographic image. As my good friend Jake Chesham said, well, why wouldn't I do it? It's another opportunity to be creative. And I go along with that ideal. But also, all of this stuff that's being projected, it reminds me also, Massive Attack used Giles Dooley's photographs. And a lot of these backdrops are using photographs. They may be, I've seen Morrissey using archival footage, and archival footage seems to be a big thing in this. I suppose it's increasingly relevant if you've got a band who visually are really quite boring, and the use of this screen, and also to big crowds, it allows somebody who's 2.5 miles away in a seat they've paid £200 for to feel as if they can actually see the person, and that the person they've paid to see is actually there. I can remember being at Wembley Arena once, seeing Bob Dylan with my back against the actual wall of the rear of the building. I was so far away. So that wasn't great. So, there are good things about this. But really what I'm talking about here is that I think that this is an opportunity. I think this is an opportunity for photographers. And I'm always very keen to explore new areas for photographers to work in, especially when there are so many complaints and discussions around the industry contracting and that there's no work out there. Well, there is always work out there. You've just got to be light-footed, and you've got to think about, well, where are my transferable skills? And visual communication and moving image is a big thing in these concerts. There was a time when a lot of photographers, of course, back in the early 1980s, with the growth of MTV, suddenly moved into the idea of doing music videos with the birth of cheap video cameras. But now, because MTV has now gone and the music video is not such a key factor in the success of a band, the idea of moving that kind of creativity, that conceptual work into making productions for bands, I think it makes sense. I think it is photography. And I think it's something that everybody who owns a camera should maybe have a play with, have a think about. Maybe find a local band, see if they'll work with you. I'm not saying that every local band is going to be able to play in Las Vegas, but there may be ways of dealing with projections and all sorts of other things that could really work for you and work for them. Who knows? It may even be a new career. I always try and read out some of your letters on these episodes when I'm on my own talking into the microphone in the garage. And you seem to enjoy them, so that's great. And thank you so much for the emails and messages that keep coming in. I've got a really short one this week to share with you, which I just felt to me as if it was all that was good. And I wanted to I wanted to finish this particular episode with something a little bit upbeat and positive. So the message said this: "Hello, I've only just started to listen to your conversations. I'm loving the breadth of the topics you cover. I'm just coming back into photography after 20 plus years out, and being able to listen and absorb is a big help. After 35 years in construction, I'm stepping up from an enthusiast to a professional-ish, and it's an exciting plus confronting time." And that's from Peter O'Leary. I just like the idea of somebody spending all that time in construction and then coming back to photography and feeling refreshed, I suppose, or at least excited about what the medium has to offer. I've been involved with photography for a very, very long time now, 43 years, and I'm still excited today as I ever was. I'm not excited by, as you know, cameras or technology or Photoshop or any of that stuff. I'm excited by possibility. The possibility of creativity, of communication, of visual communication, of verbal conversations, of listening, of meeting people, of finding myself, thanks to the camera, in places I would never have been in if it hadn't have been for that camera. That, for me, is photography. That's the door that photography opens. And then, as I've said many, many times, for me, photography is memory made history. And we're all having our own memories created for us and by us on a daily basis. So why wouldn't we constantly make work? Making that work with a little bit of understanding as to why and how, it just gives it a little bit more sense of meaning, really, a bit more sense of purpose. Anyway, that's enough from me pontificating this week. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. As always, I keep forgetting to say this, but wherever you're listening to this, if you can rate the podcast, it really helps, particularly on Spotify. Obviously, I'd prefer it if you gave us a 5-star rating, but you must follow your own heart and your own conscience. That's it from this week. It still continues to be a world on fire, and therefore I'm going to take care, and I'm sure you're going to also.